All animals are equal, but some are more equal than the other. That's the satirical phrase from George Orwell's classic novel, Animal Farm. And it effectively captures many of the things that are going on in the world today, and a teeny tiny bit of why I've been off here for a while. If you're new here, welcome. My name is Timmy, and I try to simplify concepts and document my learnings via this platform. Mostly finance, accounting, and business related. This year, there's been a lot of buzz around taxes and tax reforms all over the world. Tax reforms in Nigeria, tax reforms in India, tax reforms in the One Big Beautiful Bill in the US, abolishment of non-domicile tax status in the UK, tax policy reform changes from the OECD, and a wide array of this kind of changes. And what's interesting is every time I visited social media or read the news, there was one person or the other talking about these kinds of things. Interestingly, I saw some really good ones, but many were just half-baked or delivering blatantly incorrect information. Comments and thought that followed them seemed quite interesting, and I decided, you know what, I'm going to read some of these laws and then attempt to explain them, hopefully in an unbiased and perhaps simpler manner. One Sunday evening, as I sat at a healthcare facility I was at, I got a call from a concerned businesswoman and mother of 4 who happened to own a clothing store in Balogun Market, Lagos. And she was like, in a deep downtrodden voice, Tèmi, ṣé wọ́n fẹ́ pa wá ni? Wọ́n mà ní pé gbogbo wa máa sanwó orí 20% láti next year. Kí ni mo máa ṣe? Which loosely translates to, Tèmi, do they want to kill us? I was told they will start taking 20% of our incomes from 2026. What will I do? And just as I successfully clarified things to her, because apparently it almost did not affect her, or she would just be doing the exact same thing she was doing. Just as I clarified things to her, a nurse that was passing by, Taiwo, and a lady I hadn't really seen before walked towards me. They seemed to have overheard the conversation and came to talk about the same topic. And that lasted for more or less 30 minutes. It was during these conversations that I decided, you know what, before I actually go into the details of talking about what these tax reforms are, maybe let's give ourselves some backgrounds as to how these taxes began. Because truly, people's questions are, why tax me? I'm not seeing the benefits of taxes in the government, so why tax me? We really need to go back and tell ourselves the truth about how this 2025 form of taxation began. This woman said, Owori, poll taxes. That came from somewhere, because taxes itself in some languages do not even exist as a word. And that's what this video is about. So this is the first part of a set of videos where I try to go down history lane at a very high level, talk about how we got here. And it's titled, How Inequality Was Born. You might wonder, how does inequality affect taxation and what am I talking about? But I promise you, if you stay tuned, you're gonna see how it all comes together. For most of human history, our ancestors lived in small hunter-gatherer, bands, where hierarchy barely existed. Leadership was earned through your hunting skill, wisdom, charisma, ability to maybe solve problems and all of that. There was not much to inherit, so wealth, as we have it today in the form of surplus goods, barely existed. And that was because, there was no technology, there was no place to store, there was no way, rather, to store things. Food was communally shared because survival really demanded it. And in fact, if someone tried to hoard resources to themselves, the group will challenge them. Scholars later referred to this phenomenon as aggressive egalitarianism. So, roughly 12,000 years ago, this egalitarian world, excuse me, began to transform with what is known as the Neolithic Revolution. People started noticing that as they dropped seeds on the floor, it will grow again. And they began to experiment with these things. They will save seeds and then they started to tend small patches of land. Slowly, we, and by we I mean the human race, transitioned from hunting and gathering and moving from place to place to domesticating plants and animals and having relatively permanent settlements. Now, this shift is arguably the most consequential development in human history. It seemed to make life better, but it also created the conditions for what we have in today's world. Everything that will follow, inequality, the states, and by state I mean the government, war, and even tax. So all of these things stem from this fact that we could now store things in some form of value. It was inevitable anyways, but it's important to point that out. So basically, for the first time in the history of the human race, we had something unprecedented. Agriculture gave us surplus. There was food after everyone had eaten, and we might not even need to hunt and gather tomorrow. Although we still continue to hunt and gather, but now we also planted crops. Once you plant crops, a few things begin to happen. You need to identify where you planted it. You now have an investment somewhere that you have to look after, basically. You need to protect it from animals and maybe other gatherers. You could be smart and just make that place your base. Then, you go out, hunt and gather, return there, you keep your family there. This whole thing continued for a few generations and farming became more reliable than hunting. And now, there was less starvation, so settlement grew larger. Of course, if you have more food, now you can take care of more children or more offsprings. And starvation was just less. Now, land was no longer something we just walked on, right? It became something you lived on, you eat from all year round. So people started inherently owning lands. Basically, the land where my group or my clan or my family farms is ours. Things still seemed communal, but what's ours is ours, what's theirs is theirs, that kind of thing. And once storage and the concept of land ownership became a thing, the concept of inequality slowly began to creep in, right? But hold on a minute. One might wonder, if everyone could farm and store food, how did that whole scenario, agricultural planting, give rise to inequality? And I think the answer is quite simple. I call it natural selection. Just by sheer luck or say providence. Some family just chose more fertile land. They just settled on more fertile land that had better access to water, or they just settled in safer places with less, weather issues and all of that. These small advantages, whether you like it or not, whether it is geography, luck, birth, slowly compounded over generations. Obviously, a family with a slightly better harvest could feed more children. More children meant more workers, more strength, more influence, and also more harvest again. And the cycle just continues. So the families that owned the best land and could store their harvest the best started to gain more influence. Of course, inheritance then came in. People, I'm running through this in a quick timeline, but you get the idea of what I'm saying. People will then pass these things down to their children, to their family, so their family wealth as a whole begins to grow. But growth brings about new problems. Who manages the grain? Now we have a family of 200. There's a really big farmland that we are now managing. So who manages the grain? Who stores it? Who works on the farm? Who defends the group? Who protects the store? Who rations during droughts or field harvest? Who resolves disputes or organizes planting? What do we plant? Now, all these decisions needed to be made, and somehow we can't all be doing the exact same thing at the same time. So the concept of specialization had to emerge. Of course, not the industrial era kind of specialization, but people did certain categories of things. And I guess most of the roles were shared, rotated, or contested at the time, based on history books that we see. Over time, the people or families who controlled the surplus and could reasonably defend theirs became the people others depended on, perhaps for help in downtimes, or when things were bad, or there was a drought, or their farm got burned, or just some mishap. And slowly, if you have people depending on you for certain things, it turns to authority. I can then choose who I want to give if I'm the family that has this large storage and now there's drought in the city, right? Other groups started to owe stronger ones, power began to concentrate, and so many other things followed. Now, surplus created the conditions for inequality. It didn't cause inequality. Surplus created the conditions for inequality, leadership, and the first real concentration of power. And like I said earlier, you might wonder, how do all this still relate to taxation? And I promise I'll tie it all together. But so this video does not just extend, so much, I'm going to stop it here and we'll continue in the next one. So if you enjoyed this video, watch out for the next part where I explain how inequality led to wars, and then wars led to the establishment of the states, the government. And of course, it is the government that taxes us, so you would see how it all relates. See you on the next one. Thank you.